A huge roar suddenly burst through the air. The giant trees quivered, and the leaves shook on their branches. Then another booming bellow thundered through the forest. A roar so loud and fierce that it made a lion sound like a small cat in comparison. Danny ducked behind a nearby tree and peered out into the forest. Roar came the great sound, followed by thump, thump, thump. The ground shook violently beneath Danny's feet. So hard, in fact, that he nearly fell backwards into a giant shrub behind him. He grasped and gripped the bark of the tree tightly with his fingers. The noise grew louder and louder, the sound of giant footsteps coming closer and closer and closer. Thump, thump, thump. Roar! Danny's heart beat so fast he thought it might explode. What on earth was it? And then, between a pair of giant trees about 50 meters away, he saw it. A creature so big, frightening, and menacing that it made Danny's blood run cold in his veins. And yet it looked so very familiar. He'd seen many pictures of it in his books, but never in his wildest dreams had he ever thought that he'd ever see one in the flesh. A gigantic, ferocious, bloodthirsty Tyrannosaurus Rex. Danny couldn't believe what he was seeing. He gulped, and then he rubbed his eyes. This cannot be happening. Surely this was a dream. No, a nightmare. He opened his eyes again, but the T-Rex was still there, as large as life. It was standing still now, steam snorting hard out of its nostrils. Big, long, gusty burst, and its head was darting around from side to side as if it was searching for something. Something to eat. Danny gulped, and he felt a shiver of fear shooting down his spine like ice. He crouched down lower against the bark of the tree, pressing his body tightly against it, hoping the T-Rex hadn't spotted him. The dinosaur started to walk forwards again with slow, deliberate steps. The undergrowth crackled and crunched under the weight of its enormous clawed feet. Closer and closer it came, until it was just a few feet away from where Danny was hiding. He held his breath, not daring to make the slightest sound, and clung onto the bark even tighter. The huge dinosaur stopped still in its tracks and sniffed in the air. Sniff, sniff. It went as it took in huge lungfuls of air through its nostrils. It moved its head from side to side again, its huge piercing eyes searching the ground carefully. Then suddenly, its head stopped. It sniffed again, quicker this time, as if it had found a scent of something. Its head then swung quickly around, and its eyes narrowed as it focused in on Danny. "Ah!" screamed Danny, as the T-Rex lurched in his direction. He jumped up from his hiding place and began running as fast as he had ever run in his entire life. In a flash, the huge dinosaur changed direction and began to give chase. Thump, thump, thump. Danny ran and ran, weaving in and out of the trees in a desperate bid to escape. He jumped over fallen branches, darted around giant plants, and scrambled through thick ferns. His legs were a whirl, and his arms a blur as he hurled through the forest at breakneck speed. But still, the T-Rex followed. Thump, thump, thump. Roar! Danny dared not look back to see how close it was, but he could tell by now how he could hear its pounding feet, and it sounded like it was right behind him, maybe no more than 30 meters away. Panting and grasping for air, Danny ran on, desperately searching for a place to escape. He darted around a fallen tree, but his foot became tangled in the loose branches, and he crashed to the forest floor with a terrific thud. Desperately, he kicked himself free and began scrambling to his feet again. Now behind him, the T-Rex roared an almighty roar that rumbled in his ears like thunder. Roar! It had now gained ground on him. As he stood up, Danny was facing right towards it. The T-Rex was no more than 20 meters away. It snapped its great jaws at him hungrily and pounded relentlessly towards him, its eyes flashing cruel and merciless menace. Danny yelled out in terror, began to run again. But as he did so, a strange voice suddenly called out to him. "Over here!" it cried. Danny's eyes searched the forest. "Quick!" cried the voice again. And then Danny saw it. A small dinosaur, waving frantically at him from behind a bush to his right. A talking dinosaur? Roar! Boomed the big T-Rex again as it raced towards him. No time to ask questions, thought Danny, and he dived into the bushes behind the small dinosaur. "This way, hurry!" it cried, and set off through the forest like a shot. Ran as fast as lightning, and Danny struggled to keep up as it wove along a small pathway between the trees. "Come on, keep moving," the dinosaur urged. "We're nearly there." But Danny was slowing down. He was utterly exhausted by now, and he was breathing so hard he thought his lungs were going to burst. His legs, which had previously carried him so fast through the forest, were now aching all over and felt as if they were turning to jelly. He couldn't go on much further. He just couldn't. Now the T-Rex was gaining on them. With every bound of its powerful legs, it got closer and closer to Danny and the small dinosaur. Its huge roars shook the forest. Roar! Thump, thump, thump. It seemed to sense that its victory was near, like a lion just before it takes down an antelope. But still, Danny ran on, bravely ignoring the searing pains in his chest and summoning every ounce of his strength to keep his legs pumping forwards. In and out of the trees they went, following the winding pathway until all of a sudden they came to an abrupt stop. Danny stumbled to a halt in shock. He stared in disbelief. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. A cliff edge. They were right in front of a cliff edge. "Oops!" cried the small dinosaur. "Wrong way!" Oh my gosh, what was he going to do now? He was doomed. There was nowhere to go. Was this a trick? Had the little dinosaur lured him here on purpose? Questions buzzed and whizzed around in Danny's head like confused bees. He quickly scampered forward and peered over the edge of the cliff. It was a very long way to the ground below. Was there a way to climb down? No, it didn't look like there was. Roar! Danny shot around. He looked and stared in horror at the T-Rex, which was now standing just a few meters away. It was breathing heavily, and the snorts of air coming out of its mouth sounded like a steam train. Then, with slow, deliberate steps, began to move forward. Its piercing eyes never left Danny for a second. Danny, trembling with fright, inched slowly backwards, nearer and nearer to the very edge of the cliff. Then suddenly, the T-Rex made its move. With a mighty roar, it leapt into the air and dived at him, its enormous jaws snapping like ivory castanets. As Danny tried to scramble sideways out of the way, a pair of sharp talons suddenly grabbed him. Well, that's all the time I've got to read. If you're looking for a children's book that will thrill and entertain your child with every page, well then Danny and the Dinosaurs fits the bill perfectly. For more information about Danny and the Dinosaurs by Lysak Stram, then click on the Amazon.com link that's below. Goodbye.